Hey guys, there it is then, that video where I was going to talk about stuff that I did on the racetrack in a real car quite a while back. So here it is. I've made some preparations, very important. Wear a cool shirt, that's sorted, and I've made a mic stand for my mod mic out of the Christmas tree. The very rare Husinkveld Engineering Christmas tree. So that's all set up. I've got some truth syrup, and I've made sure to not have any super private sensitive data on the screen on my monitor. It's always tricky. You share your screen and the porn is showing or whatever, but I think I have nothing showing that your eyes aren't allowed to see. So with all that out of the way, what have I been up to then? Well, real racing, I've never really done anything other than just cheap rental carts. And I spent about 12 minutes before my arms were knackered in a 100cc two-stroke kart. That was quite awesome. Also quite a long time ago. I believe it was 2003 with my friend Mark Mercer, who's actually quite a good sim racer and more so even a real driver. But it was very limited, very short, and over the years I've kind of wanted to do some racing, but some actual driving. But what you often can do is like a track experience where you have a few different vehicles you can drive for a short little while. I always figured there are a couple of downsides. A lot of the time you can only drive them for a short time, and I really wanted to get to the bottom, like a little bit. Gain some actual experience and get to know the car and do more than a few laps. And that sort of withheld me a bit from doing something like this. Plus, you're doing it with other maniacs who I don't trust, and this is no Shift R, reset the car stuff, and I didn't really feel confident and comfortable with the idea that other people who might not be as careful as I am would be on the track as well. However, one of our customers at Husinkveld is a pretty accomplished race driver. He also is an instructor at these events where you can get your European racing license. So there's no international, it's not really high-end, it's just there's a national license and there's a European license, and you could get one of those. And it's 3 days in a rental BMW 325i. I have a cheat sheet to see if I'm talking about it. So that's 3 days, and that's actually considerable. You know, you can probably get used to the vehicle. And it was on Assen. There's a track map on the screen there, which is very nearby. This is quite convenient. I hate driving. Yeah, so this is nearby. That was handy. Safe track as well. Some people suggested I should go to the Nürburgring. I guess they want to see me in between six sheets of plywood or something. No, I like the idea of keeping it safe and local, and Assen is not the most spectacular track, but it's quite safe and technical. So a good track for that. And I would still be doing it with other maniacs, so I wouldn't be just the sole maniac on the track, but the conditions were reasonable, and this guy, our customer, recommended it to me. I think, well, you know, what the heck, the car won't be perfect. There will be some other guys on the track, but actual track experience. That was what it's all about. So the car was a 1990s BMW 325, about 190 horsepower, probably about 1200, 1300 kilos. So super fast, no, but a reasonable bit of power still, especially compared to my Ford Fiesta that I drive some of the days. More rust though than my Ford Fiesta. The cars were reasonably functional, but they've been used for these events and also for rallying and drifting for years and years. The guys who operated them were really professional and helped mending all the issues, and they were very dedicated and they had their heart in the right place, but they couldn't really hide the fact that the cars were a little bit rusty and not ideal. But this is your first attempt at real driving, and there's going to be plenty of weak links in the chain other than just the car. So decided to go with that. 3 days, as I said, and what does that cost? Real racing is quite expensive. So the 3-day course with instructors and the exam and stuff was 1,300. The car for 3 days was 1,700. And then there's the slight itty little bit you have to pay for fuel, because you go through it quite at an alarming, disturbing rate. So at the end it's about 3,500 euros. And of course, since I live locally to the track, I just went home and slept there, so no hotel costs. So a very nice direct drive wheel, a good set of pedals and a rig in 3 days. So yeah, sim racing is not expensive at all. So how did it go? Geez, finally. First day it was like March, and it was super cold and super windy and very, very wet. And since this was probably new for most of the guys and girls there, the plan was to build it up slowly. So first they divided the track into a few sections, and we would gather here, and then they would let us loose. You would accelerate and first like drive the corner line here for this very annoying tightening hairpin. It's a very difficult corner. And then you would just slowly drive somewhere else, like here. Here would be a brake test where you have to go up to like 80 kilometers an hour and brake at the markers, and then at the end an instructor would give you some feedback how you were doing. And here at this section of the track they arranged like a little slalom, and always at the end there was an instructor, you know, who sort of waved you like it's your turn, and then you opened the window and he gave you some feedback. So there wasn't really doing laps or anything, just a couple of specific things over and over again. And that was quite cool. So how did I do? Well, the first time I gathered here, I felt, well, it's a bit wet, but I've been practicing in a sim. I'm a professional, so I can use second gear and accelerate out of this strubben, which is struggle. That's how you sort of remember it. So I went there, I think, well, 50% throttle, easy. And that was my first spin of the day. There weren't that many spins that will follow. I kind of learned, but that sort of made me think, whoa, okay, not a lot of grip and more oversteer than I expected there. So with my confidence slightly dented, but the car not, did all right there, I went on to the braking test, which was here, and then I went up to like 80 kilometers, slammed the brakes, instantly locked everything up. Was really confused about the brake pedal and didn't really do very well. So with my confidence further dented, I went to the slalom section, and that was kind of okay. And then we did this for like 15 times over in 45 minutes, just keep practicing. And it was really wet and really slippery, and the car was super oversteer. I really didn't think that it would like 30% throttle in third gear out of the hairpin, 2000 RPM, it could go just like that. And by go, I mean, wouldn't necessarily spin me out, but you would feel it instantly take a little bit of an angle there that you weren't really planning on doing. So that was eventful, kind of. So quite difficult, and always these braking tests were so hard because the brake pedal felt most like pressing on a pneumatic cylinder. Like it even made like a scary sound, like sorry for, I don't know what that sounds like, but kind of like that. So very long, very spongy, and very like damped. So you would get on it with a bit of force, but then it would sort of not tell you really what you were doing. And combined with the low grip in the wet, there was a very low amount of pedal pressure needed, because this was sort of a street car in the sense that the brakes were powered still, the steering had power steering, so it was default BMW parts there. I think the brake discs were a bit bigger and stuff like that, but the brake pedal was so hard to use with the low grip, and the steering very light, and the car was very oversteery. So it was a bit tricky at first in day one. And when we did those 3 tests for a little while, we sort of went out in groups of 5, with the instructor always in the leading car, and then people following, just, you know, relatively slowly going around the track, the lines and everything like that, but still not really pushing it. But it was a nice build up towards pushing it a bit harder. And since I already went around once and discovered that the grip was very low and oversteer was really easy, it wasn't too bad to take it slowly in the beginning. But we did it more and more, and you took it in turns. So the instructor was in the front car, and then after 5 laps you came in and you switched the orders, and then the instructor got in the next car. So you always had an instructor next to you. He also drove for a couple of laps, showing you the lines and the techniques and stuff like that. Now, it was all quite familiar, the theory about it, but I struggled a bit with the practice of the car not being like a sim car in how it felt with the controls mainly. So as the day progressed, it was more and more like going a little bit quicker, and also allowing overtaking on the straights, and then at the end overtaking everywhere. This might have been actually been at the end of the day or beginning of day 2. It's been a while. So as you can sort of imagine, we slowly build it up, and at some point, I think it was day 2, you were basically just doing your own laps, and you could come in the pits and there was a line or not. And then if you were in front of the line, an instructor would step in and do some laps with you for more teaching, which I never did because I'm an expert. I don't need any coaching, but it was very nice that it was possible, and they were very cool guys as well, all with actual driving experience, some having driven some vehicles that I'd be pretty scared to even try. So qualified bunch, and positive guys as well, so atmosphere was great. But I didn't really take on any coaching because the weak link was me and trying to operate the controls. So super wet, super cold, super slippery. And yeah, on day 2, it was very cold and slippery again, and I was struggling with the car. And you know, when we came in, the guy who drove behind me said, why, how is it possible that you were sliding? And I was just cruising through the corner. So I started to gather that perhaps my car was a bit more extremely set up, or had something with the tires or something that was not optimal. We were on road tires, actually, just new. I don't think any, like, not a special type or high quality, just fairly bog standard road tires. But somehow the balance was really oversteery, and my instructor said as well, he said, well, it's very entertaining and very educational to feel the oversteer, but it's very slidey, and if you want, you can always come in and we can see if we can change something with the tires or the tire pressures, or get a different car or something. They were quite open about that. But I stuck it out through the first day and a part of the second day. So oversteer then, how was that? Actually, yeah, whatever, oversteer. So at first I spun, like the first time here at the hairpin, I thought I could get away with a certain amount of throttle, and I couldn't, and I was totally unprepared for what happened, and I was did a nice spin there. Although I did have the consciousness to press the clutch, so didn't stall. That's something you learn in sim racing. Even if you're terrible at it, press that damn clutch and you can drive off. It was in a way easy, but also in a way not. So with the instructor next to me, we got a bit of oversteer, and then he was sort of going into, okay, this is the moment where most people will spin. How am I going to explain to this guy within half a second what he's going to do? So he was sort of looking for ways to show me where to look and where to steer, but no, that was almost like completely natural. A bit too much throttle, back stepped out and opposite lock, and I was at an angle. It sort of felt like time was slowing down there. I think, hey, I'm doing something that's working. It was very natural, very logical, just like I've experienced in the sim with Automobilista and perhaps Assetto Corsa as well. Painless in a way. However, also a bit problematic because the car with its power steering was super light. So light, in fact, that in a right-hand corner, and a bit worn out, of course, in right-hand corners at about 90 degrees steering lock, you would sort of feel like a little detent, as if there was like a little bump or something in the steering rack, and it would almost stay there if I let go. Not quite, but it was so light that that little bit of bump of friction in the steering rack would almost be enough to keep the steering wheel turned. So it was super light, and in the sim, in Automobilista for sure, in Assetto Corsa with my very limited experience there, it feels a bit less direct, but in Automobilista you can almost leave the oversteer up to the steering wheel. It will really quickly try to catch it, and it will make the front wheels point in the direction you're going. With this super like low effort power steering thing, well, it sort of had like a G25, worn out G25 feel to it, where it would kind of suggest it wanted to turn into some opposite lock, but you mostly had to do it yourself, and especially straightening it out. So you could catch the slide a bit, but then straightening it out would have to happen quite quickly, obviously, and you would get very little assistance from the steering. So you'd have to manually turn the wheel back, and that's something, it's like drifting without force feedback almost. It's super hard because you get no help from it, and that was difficult, and that's what sort of kept me from going Dorifto. I could take the risk in the corners, especially the low speed corners, just try it, but there were 25 other guys on the track, and if I would spin, I wouldn't mind, but then some guy behind me might panic and run into me. So I didn't really feel confident in spinning out, often trying to learn the more like ambitious oversteer. And it was fine like until 180 degrees opposite lock, and then you sort of had to re-grip, but you also had to straighten it out manually, like I said, without force feedback almost. That I wasn't really confident applying more than a certain amount of opposite lock. That was quite easy until a certain point, and then just the manual steering, well, the power assisted steering, meaning you have to do it all manually. Doesn't make any sense, I know. That made it hard. Another thing that made it a little tricky was the throttle pedal, and that was quite interesting. Remember perhaps that with Automobilista we added a different way to map the throttle and the torque. Well, it was extremely evident that that was a good idea, even though I'm not sure if all cars have implemented it properly. But like I said, in this hairpin, 2000 RPM, third gear, almost nothing. Red line is 6500. Just a hint of throttle and it would spin out. In other words, the torque you got at low RPM and a little bit of throttle was quite considerable. And that was more so than I expected. And also the throttle pedal was quite short, and I tried to be very gentle with it, but I always would get like, as if it had a worn out potentiometer or something. So like a little bit of a spike. It was very hard to control it. So far the force feedback was terrible, the brake pedal was terrible, and the throttle pedal wasn't as accurate as we're used to. So sim equipment with the direct drive wheels and good pedals and stuff is all way superior to this BMW, and that really made it hard to get a feel for things. Downshifting as well in the rain, that's something I didn't expect to be so bad, but I had so little rear grip, the thing sliding everywhere. Downshifting and letting go of the clutch would quite easily unsettle the rear to a point of, well, easily turning into a bigger problem. I didn't spin from that, but I had some moments where it was hard, and you think, well, Niels, heel and toe, that's what you do in a sim, but it's like stepping on a sponge that they call a brake pedal, and then, yeah, there was no way I was confidently going to heel and toe there, because it was just felt very strange. So at the end, I couldn't really get to the limit of braking, especially in the wet, and just went very sort of conservative with it. Opposite lock, easier in the slower corners, mainly because my confidence was fine there. If I would spin out, I would be fine. I wouldn't really have an issue with it. I would be slightly scared that guys behind me would panic and bump into me or something, but it wasn't. It's a very safe track. However, in like fourth gear, 70 mile an hour sort of corners, it would still easily go sideways on the power, which is insane. I thought you would need a lot more horsepower for that, but it was very oversteery. There it was a bit less, I had less confidence, because while I was confident until a certain amount of opposite lock, you want to have some safety margin, like I want to, if I'm safe until 180 degrees, I want to make sure I don't get more than 90 degrees, so I have a bit of a leeway catching a bigger slide. And the faster you go, you sort of feel a bit, well, okay, this is not a game. I don't want to put it in the barriers, although that would be quite hard because it's really open and safe track. But I didn't want to spin because, well, what do you learn from that? So that meant my margin in the higher speed corners, the sort of opposite lock I would allow myself to have, was quite limited, and I couldn't really push it because it was so easy to go over that safe oversteer limit. So at lower speed it was interesting and easy up to a point. After I got used to sort of manually returning the wheel, and after I got used to the throttle pedal giving me all the torque at what felt like 25% throttle travel, so got used to that. But higher speed stuff, not super confident there. So very slidey, very tricky. And at some point I had some trouble keeping up with my group of 5 where we were doing the laps. And I was thinking, geez, Niels, you sim racing for 20 something years, got my direct drive, got my physics knowledge. It was all sort of like a balloon that burst. What's going on? Not that I was thinking I would be like great at it, but a lot of these people who were there were enthusiastic but had no experience on the track or in a sim. I figured, well, I should have a slight advantage at least, knowing a little bit about the theory and some of sim racing. So I was struggling, and then on day 2 it's very wet again and slippery. My instructor went with me again, actually the other instructor, the customer who suggested I was going to do this, and he said, okay, he went like, let's see, where was it? At this end, an interesting thing to ramble on about actually, the tarmac was different. So where the grip levels on this part were okay, these corners, different tarmac or something, it was a different world in grip in the wet. It was very interesting to see how much different that was. And so he did a lap just to see. I was having some trouble with the car, and here's where the drift started. And we were sort of on the lock stops until about here. And then he said, okay, Niels, you got a drift car. This is not a race car. We should go in and get it, new car, do something about it, because it's fun, but this is not what a car should feel like. So I was a little bit relieved in the sense that, well, perhaps this car is being the issue and my faultless talent is just not able to shine. So we went into the pits, and at the end they changed the rear tires. So there were street tires on it, new street tires, and they had a couple sets of worn semi-slicks, a bit better compound. So they put that at the rear. And that was, of course, a dramatic difference. It also started to dry out slowly. And to give you an idea, we were sliding, and even my instructor was sliding here at Ramshoek. That's the quickest left-hander, at around 105 kilometers an hour. And we changed the tires and we were doing 140 kilometers an hour. So that's a huge difference just from some rear tires. So it was somehow extremely rear grip limited. I don't know what it was, if the front anti-roll bar had broken, or if they installed a super solid rear anti-roll bar, or what it was, but extreme oversteer. But new tires, and that was a major difference. Also with the downshifting, letting like releasing the clutch, it would chirp a little, but it was far more stable, and I could start to actually drive this thing without getting oversteer and get far more confidence with it. Then it dried out more and more, and the confidence really sort of it started to click, because that car was just undrivable in my hands before, and luckily the instructor who actually drove the champ car back in the day, so he has some right to speak, said it was an undrivable car. Didn't pay him to say that. Transformed the car, transformed the handling, and brought back some confidence, which was good, because at some point we were starting some other tests, like doing little races. So we would start at the start-finish line, first in groups of 3, and then 6, then 9, do a little race until the exit of this hairpin. And I was kind of scared actually at the thought of doing that, because I couldn't really control my car, and then let alone diving into turn 1 with nine of us. So I was kind of thinking, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm a bit scared about it. But now with this new car, it was transformed. I could, like, yeah, I was the boss now, so fine. And did a couple of those little races. I didn't push too hard. I didn't want to cause any damage, and I wasn't really there for racecraft. I was just trying to get a feel for the car and the track and the lines and how the physics were. But yeah, much more confidence, and it became more fun then. And if I tried really hard here in the hairpin, you could get a bit of oversteer, but mostly it was just stable and understeery. As it got drier and drier, perhaps too understeery, because now with the balance difference from having semi-slick rear tires, it was a bit too understeery. But then, you know, race drivers, they complain. If it's too oversteery, it's terrible. If it's too understeery, it's terrible. But at least it was safe, and I could sort of start to push and get consistent. And that went really well at the end. Instead of having trouble staying with people, I was catching more and more people, overtaking them safely. Yeah, no situations. It really went like a lot better, and had a lot of fun there. So yeah, that was a pretty good thing. And then on day 3, it was mostly dry. I think it started a bit damp, but it was dry the rest of the day. We were kind of doing the same thing, just do your laps. If you need help, go in and an instructor will jump in and coach you. Didn't do any of that because I'm the expert. Sorry, I need some truth syrup for that. This is getting out of control. I'm the noob. See, it works. Just enjoying my laps more and more because I was in control now, and it had grip and it worked, and I could do a few things with it. Then I had a slight brake failure. That was interesting. So here is the Vane Slang. At the end you do about 170 kilometers an hour here. Quite hard braking, and then there's this third gear right and an opening left. And right about here, when I hit the brakes, I heard a very loud bang somewhere at the back of the car, and my brake pedal, which was already terrible, suddenly went really long and sort of barely worked. One of the rear brakes had exploded. I think the brake pad sort of flew out or something. Something broke at 110 miles an hour. That was interesting. It was really safe because there's a corner here, but there's nothing behind it, so it's just a big runoff area, and I wasn't close to anybody. Nobody was close to me. It was all fine. Wasn't even too scary. I just went back to the pits, and they replaced the exploded bits, and I had a cup of coffee and went out again. But I was quite happy at that point that we were at Assen, which is a super safe track. If this was like Zandvoort or the Nürburgring, there could have been a barrier there. We could have, I mean, you could have hurt yourself a little bit and have a couple grand worth of damage. So yeah, that was one of those moments where I think, okay, this is real, you know, it's fun, but it's also very serious. And even though it's super safe, I'm not a risk taker at all, and I'm, you know, you're not fully in control. There's always circumstances, and in a game that's fine, but it made me, I was quite wary of it. You know, some people are gung-ho, let's try it flat out first and then dial it back. I'm sort of very cautious in my approach in general. Not really the bungee jumping kind, you could say. So yeah, that brake failure was interesting. That was just before we had our final laps, and then we had our exams. So at first I thought, well, exams, is some instructor going to sit next to you and judge you based on your laps? No. Instructors were placed, and officials were placed at each corner, and they would sort of look at the number on your car and judge you on a few things. And then at the end, they would come together and say, well, number 10 was terrible there and there. You should go home right away, or not. So that was amazing because these were the best laps of the weekend. Why? Well, we were only let loose in groups of 5 or something. So for the first time the whole weekend, the track was almost empty, and we were spaced out nicely. And throughout the days, I had quite a bit of, well, no issues with the traffic, but the thing is, sometimes here on the straight, okay, I'd let them by, and then they sort of cut in front of you right before braking. And since they do that, okay, I'm not going to try and brake late because I don't know when they're going to brake. some people spun out. You also have to keep an eye on that. So the traffic was starting to become an issue as I got more confident and wanted to go quicker, and then came into traffic and stuff like that. It was quite busy, like 25 cars on the track. So on the exam runs with just 5 on the track, these were the most beautiful laps of the day. I could really focus on driving. There's nothing in my mirrors, nobody ahead of me. Actually, I overtook 2 guys, so I was at least 30 seconds quicker than them over 5 laps. 15 seconds from one and 30 seconds from the other, but still, I had a little bit of speed by then. And to give you some idea, this Ramshoek corner was now just a lift at about 100 miles an hour-ish. If the speedo was correct, it could be that easily. So I was quite confident there. This is where I was gaining on just about everybody, because the car just worked, had a bit of understeer, but it was safe and I could really get in there. So yeah, those were amazing laps, and if exams always were so cool, I would love to do more of them. And then we had to come in and they would judge, and we had some like the theoretical part of the exam, all silly questions. If somebody's like, the questions were quite hilarious. If they show you a black flag, does it mean A, you've made the best start in years, you're gonna be added to the Hall of Fame, or perhaps you have had a false start or something. Really, that sort of level. So that wasn't too hard to pass. So yeah, I got my license in the end, and then we still had a couple of hours before the track shut down. So most people were quite tired by now, and I sort of felt it a little bit as well. Even my neck started to hurt from the approximately 1G that we were pulling. Wimp. Anyway, with still a bit of time to go and most people being a bit tired, it was quite like peaceful out on the track. And I did some more laps, and these were also amazing with no traffic and no mirrors to worry too much about and stuff. That was, so it started very tricky with the wet and the oversteer, and it just kept sliding on me. Even part throttle in 4th gear, it would just step out, and it sort of became a bit like, am I cut out for this? Even though I could deal with some of the oversteer naturally, and it felt sort of naturally, made far more difficult from having the terrible pedal and force feedback and pedals were terrible. But at the end, yeah, but not the confidence like, oh yeah, I'll do this and I can brake late, that's fine. That only came when we changed the tires and it started to dry out, and although a bit too much understeer, it was safe and sound and stable, and like the instructor said, yeah, this is far more like how you would want it to feel if it was for real. And it was for real actually this time. So yeah, that was the progress. I've been rambling for quite a while, haven't I? I still haven't got to your questions. I hope you're still here. Let's look at my cheat sheet. Yeah, I think that was pretty much that. And you've asked me some questions, which I've put on the screen. And in order to answer them truthfully, I better that's just show off. Slurpy wine. A wine connoisseur. No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm seeing my desktop and I've absolutely left nothing on the screen that you're not supposed to see, so that's good. So let's just go through your questions now. I realize my YouTube popularity is a bit down since AMS is a bit quiet and I'm not uploading a lot, very busy with other things. So, well, we'll see if we can do like a status update for things at some point. But still, quite a few questions, so let's just take them from the top. It's also interesting that when a week ago I said, thanks, got any more? Go ahead. And then nobody posted any more questions. So yeah, that's your popularity in a nutshell. Jimmy is taking all my subscribers. Brr. And he had a proper M4 that actually worked instead of my crappy old BMW 3 Series. So, let's go through the questions and make myself a bit smaller. Finally. So what are your tips and suggestions to sim racers who want to try the real thing on track for the first time? So having the luxury of being a physics guy as well as a hardware guy, I sort of prepared by making the car for the sim. Roughly, like the gear ratios, the power, and like street car grip levels. Sending a few videos to my instructor, and he said, well, this seems reasonable. So I had a reasonable idea of, in the dry, what the grip levels and stuff would be. Did it help? A little bit, I'd say, just like with the gearing a little, and just the sense of speed that I was going to have. So yeah, that helped, but yeah, it's hard to say to what sort of a degree. This whole thing is hard to say because I've been sim racing all my life, really, and it's hard to say what sort of part sim racing has played in all this because there's no clone of me that hasn't had any sim racing experience and tried the same thing. It's hard to be too confident about how much sim racing helps, but it helped to familiarize myself with the track, and I had a little map of the track printed on my steering wheel so I could learn the corner names, so I would be clever when I had to give some feedback to my instructors, who turned out just went with numbers, so all those names were all for nothing. Woo. So the most important tip and suggestion is probably to just take the plunge if you really want to. I've been waiting for years because I'm always doubting, well, the car's going to be a bit bad or there's going to be nutters on the track, including me. At some point, if you want it, you probably have to just, okay, shell out the money and do it. So how does the steering feel in the real car differ from the sim? This was, I've already mentioned it a bit, so different because it was like a super damped, very power assisted, low feel rack. That just made it super hard, especially when it was sliding, because it wasn't giving me the information I'm used to in the sim, where it would straighten out and help you with the opposite lock. So it was really manual, and you really didn't feel anything. It was just going by the seat of your pants and finding the steering lock, beyond which you would just get understeer. It sort of, that felt quite natural, but it wasn't really information through the steering wheel. It was just information through looking and feeling a bit, just like in the sim. Really, you turn the wheel and you turn it further, you don't feel or see more rotation. That's where your understeer is. But the steering wheel didn't tell much to me. Like I said, it had this dead zone, this spot where at 90 degrees it would, like this, it would sort of almost be able to let go, and the steering wheel would almost stay there. So it was terrible. And the brakes, yeah, power assisted, no feel at all, and I had no idea if the force I was applying sort of had anything to do with anything, especially since I wanted to get on the brakes sort of quickly. But it seemed like the force that required was mainly going in the power assisted system and not actually to the rear. It felt really disconnected and terrible. So absolutely terrible. No feel from the wheel or from the pedal, and that really was worse than I expected. I expected it to be poor-ish, but not this bad. So the sim is way better than real life. So René asks, did your instructor say anything that made you think, hey, that's a physics misconception? Should I say anything to piss them off? There was a little bit of like theory and in classroom stuff, but not a lot. That was quite nice, because I was afraid that perhaps we would have lots of theory and sit there for hours and hours when I probably know all that because, you know, expert me. No, but just being a physics guy and being a beginner sort of first time at the track, theory wasn't going to be the problem. But it was really short and to the point, and it was mainly about actually getting out there and doing laps. And I was really glad that's what it was structured like, because they said, yeah, you're going to do lots of laps, and they cut the crap straight out on track. Just a couple of hints and tips in like 25 minutes or something, and then we were out. So no chance to think they were talking nonsense. But like I said, these guys were doing like somebody was going to the Sebring 12 hours, another guy drove an IndyCar. So these guys sort of they knew what they were doing, unlike me most of the time. He's also a question about the brakes. Yeah, the pedal stiffness. Yeah, already said it felt terrible. And the stiffness as well, quite low effort, especially in the wet. And that's also made it more difficult, because the smaller the effort, the harder it is to be consistent, especially with the sim pedals being so precise and going up to reasonable forces. So that was like getting used to it all over again. And I wouldn't even know how to make a pedal set so bad that it would feel similar to this. It was really terrible. We don't sell pedals, Marquis, so I'm sorry, only pedals. How can I, as Niels, so not as the other various personalities that I seem to have, learn something new about racing? I'm not exactly sure how you'd mean that, but all the time, really. Almost daily, I'm still working with physics stuff, and it's just you find some new data, or you figure something out, or you try something in the car setup, or this experience doing it for real. What I noticed, for example, the point where understeer started to happen was at a smaller steering wheel angle than I expected. So perhaps the tires at these pressures, at these grip levels, had a bit less slip angle required on them than I would have expected, for example, or the steering rack was terrible and the car was all crooked. So it's not definitive, but constantly, really, always you learn something. Whether what you learn is correct or not, that's the question. So there were no sim races there, and I started off slow because of the car, and at the end I was catching up. I overtook a lot of people. I'm not sure if I was like barely in the top half or in the top 5 or something. That I don't know, but most people were fine, and a lot of spins, of course, and sometimes the gravel trap was a busy place, but most people were doing reasonably well. Just a couple of damage punts here and there, but very few. I stayed out of that. I didn't want to race people too closely. It wasn't my point, really. I just wanted to get a feel for the car. So yeah, I did lock up, but in the wet and with these hard flat like road tires, no flat spots, I let go of the brake before that was even going to happen. While going toward an apex, did it happen to you that you knew you were going to run out of asphalt on exit? Barely. At some point at the end, in the dry, I started to push it a little bit, and yeah, I sort of overcooked it into the slower corners a little bit, but not to the point where I wasn't able to sort of still make it just about inside the track limits. And that's also something I learned, or is quite tricky. You sort of try really hard to keep it on the track, but a lot of the time there's so much runoff, it's probably easier just to, okay, accept, straighten out the wheel, just go over those curbs, take a bit of runoff. It's probably paved for some of the way, or quite hard, or a bit of grass. That can be safer and easier than trying to save it and not making it and spinning out. And that's counterintuitive. The instructors showed that if you mess up, just you go a bit wide, it's fine, but that was tricky to apply. So well, I can save this, I can keep it in. It's in many ways kind of the same as in the sim. I'll make more comparisons later, but yeah, if you overcook it. But in the sim, you sort of, I don't know, I don't really choose to go off track somehow. I don't know. That felt a bit different, just in allowing yourself to go off track. In the game, it's fine. It doesn't matter. You don't feel that. And here you go, okay, I'm going off the track. I've never been there before. How bumpy is it? Are there rocks or anything? You don't know. It's all safe and flat, but still, it's a switch that didn't really trigger a lot. Christopher Snow, yeah, that rings a bell. Jeez. Do you think driving on a track in real life improved your sim racing in any way, in terms of where you look while driving? So that, yeah, the vision, that's interesting. I like the question so far, by the way, that's neat. So with triple screens that I use, the bezels are always a bit annoying. You know, everything has its pros and cons, but the bezels are a bit of a thing. And if every time I try to really look into the corners with triple screen, it's sort of like, okay, I'm looking at this one or I'm looking at that one. It's not really fluid. It's quite hard. And I didn't really know what to do in real life, actually. I was sort of, okay, I want to look ahead, but I was thinking about it too much. And at the end, I sort of didn't think about it. And I don't really know where I was looking. Kind of true. Apparently forward most of the time and a bit into the corners, but that's a little different just because you're focusing so far away compared to so close by. I think that's something, gotta have something to do with it. But yeah, where you look and stuff, yeah, that's something if I do this again, I'll pay more attention to it. I guess with VR it would make more sense, but the times I drove with VR I also wasn't used to like really looking at where I was gonna go in a while. I always sort of looked only a little bit. So vision is really interesting and a part that I'm not quite sure about how I did it and how you should do it. Probably look ahead quite a lot, but didn't do that, I think, so much. So were you focused 100%? Yeah, sometimes I find myself wandering and thinking about stuff. That was, yeah, I mentioned a little bit. I was quite conscious that this was for real and it was fun, but with the car stepping out in fourth gear at like 80 miles an hour in the wet, in a way that's not too, I don't know, it was safe and it was fine in a way, but it's also, okay, this is real. I had that voice, okay, this is real and I don't want to damage anything and I don't want to spin out. So yeah, I was focused and my mind never really wandered, even at the end. I came in half an hour before the day was over at the third day because I think, well, either I'm imagining it or my right rear tire is starting to make a lot of strange noises before I have another brake failure or something. That's just, okay, I've had my fun and I'm getting a bit tired. My neck feels a bit weird from the 1G. Let's come in. So I was quite focused and also aware of the concentration that was going down. But like I said, I'm not a risk taker. I'm very sort of build it up slowly and was quite conscious that, yeah, what I was doing. Is there a thing you found to be wrong, your assumption from programming a sim model? Well, the real life was wrong most of the time with its terrible input and grip levels. Hard to say, you know, this is one car, not too well prepared and just a couple of days on the track, which was a lot for a first experience, but most of it made sense. The throttle response was very interesting. I can model that now in Automobilista. So if it's very touchy and you get all the torque at 1% throttle at low RPM, I can do that. And that was actually sort of evidence that that system is worth doing. So that was very good. Assumptions perhaps with the slip angle, like when the understeer came, how much steering lock that was needed. But so many things are at play, including sort of slightly dodgy car that it's hard to say, and dodgy tires, cheapish probably. I mean, these were nice Michelins. So perhaps that's something to think about, but the thing with this real experience is it's still just one experience. And if there's something I've learned over the years is that you cannot really say much about one set of data. You have to have a lot of sets and then sort of see a pattern or an average. How long did the tires last, and are there different compounds? Well, there were street tires and they had to last you the whole weekend, which was, given it was mostly wet, easy. I guess if you didn't feel the understeer, you kept just racking it on, you would see some wear on the tires. There was a little bit of wear on them, but wasn't too bad. Yeah, well, at some point I had semi-slick rears and street compound fronts. So yeah, different compounds, but pretty much everybody was just on road tires. So how hard did I push? Only when the confidence came, as it started to dry out and I had my rear grip sorted. Yeah, then I started to push, although the brake pedal always felt strange. So I got to the point where I was consistent and not locking up, but not near the limit of braking, I don't think. But at least I was consistent and I made the corner entry every time, most of the time. When I was trying to push on the brakes, too often it wouldn't work and I would miss my entry, or I would carry a bit too much speed and they would mess me up more than I would have gained on the braking. So I sort of settled for, okay, this pedal is weird, I cannot really get to the limit, let's just brake at 2/3 or 3/4 and have it done. Another thing, the gear shifter was quite worn, I think the synchros, so I couldn't shift quickly at all. And at some places the gearing was a bit annoying, that you would kind of like an upshift for a little bit, but then you have to downshift again, and the downshift would unsettle the back a little bit, and the upshift would take time, the downshift as well. So at some points I just decided, okay, let's just slowly run it towards the rev limiter for a little bit, instead of doing an upshift and a downshift, which takes a lot of time and was a bit tricky. So yeah, not super pushy, but in the end I think I was consistent and quick. About pushing, I span out the first time, the first corner, and then I think twice. One with the instructor besides me. I just got some opposite lock and I got a bit confident. I think, well, this angle can grow, and it did, and then eventually it grew out of control. I had a bit of a tank slapper because I couldn't straighten it out because I had to do it all myself and it was too late, and then I knew what I was supposed to be doing, but I couldn't really do it at that time. What do you have to do to get a racing license? Well, go to one of these days, because the instructors are there, they are sort of qualified, and you have the 3-day program. At the end you are judged. That's pretty much it. You don't even need a racing license. The cool story, one of the guys there, he was sort of messing about in the car park, and people were, what's he doing? Well, he never drove stick before, so he learned himself how to shift, and then he went on the race course, and then he got his license, so that's pretty cool. Get Sideways, that's a cool name. I've been having this feeling for a while that almost every tire model there is right now has far too smooth a transition between gripping and starting to slide, which is especially noticeable in the low-speed tight corner stuff. Furthermore, it appears that when the car has started to slide inertially, okay, it keeps losing speed too gradually, almost in a linear fashion, even when it has become really slow. Almost looks like some kind of grippy ice or something. Beam NG, no, I see Jimmy fail at that. That's about all I've done. It seems super hard to drive though, no control whatsoever. So Jimmy's not too bad, and he can't really have any faith at any slip angle there. So no, I don't think it's very good yet. But the transition between gripping and starting to slide it felt super smooth. It was just in the rain. It was the throttle pedal and the opposite lock. There wasn't really a difference. It sort of grew from gripping into starting to slide. Not the first time when I just used 4 times the throttle that I was later turned out to be the maximum. But once you've had a feel for that, no, it was very gradual and very smooth. And it felt like you could stay at like a slide opposite lock or slide drift for as long as the corner went. It wasn't snappy or anything. You just had to be very careful with the throttle, which was very torquey at small inputs, and with the opposite lock that was hard to control. But those were the things that made it hard, not so much that it was a harsh transition and the tires suddenly felt completely different. No, it sort of blended all together and was fine really. So yeah. Speed and fear factor. Yeah, I already talked about it. It did hold me back when it was wet and I had like slides at 70 miles an hour where I didn't really want them. So only when the setup changed and it dried out, yeah, I got really sort of, there was no fear, because I'm not sure if it was fear completely. It's just that uncomfortable. I mean, I knew rationally that it was safe. I didn't think I was going to die or anything. It's just there are a couple of uncertainties that I might not be able to catch this slide when the opposite lock gets too big, and my throttle control and the weird throttle pedal might make it that I exceed that safe zone. So, and if I spin out, how do the others react? Are they blind or not? So if I was alone on the track, I would have pushed more, but I'm just really not a risk taker. But that started to mess with the enjoyment a little bit at the end, because I couldn't keep up with some guys, and it kept always stepping out at the slightest touch of throttle in 4th gear. So when that was sorted, yeah, the confidence really came, and I really enjoyed it. And those few laps on my XM, I almost went a bit teary-eyed at the end, because this is how it's supposed to be. It felt awesome. Whoa, okay. Physically, well, one advantage of powered brakes and power steering, it was fine. At the end, my neck started to feel a little, yeah, you made me repeat it, a little bit tired. Just 1G what you do, but I never wear a helmet in real life or in the sim, and there's no G-forces. So you do hundreds of laps, it became just a little naggy on, and not pain or anything, just a bit nagging, and that's sort of fine. Although that can mess with your concentration, that's not fine. So. At the end, I think I reached, in the corners, definitely somewhere near the car's full potential. Braking never completely, but at some point started to push it a little bit towards the end. But in the corners, I think I was fine. But it's just the braking and entering that was the problem. So apart from braking, I think I went reasonably close in cornering speed, but there's so much to gain by taking more speed into the corners and braking into the corners better. But at times I was not slow, I think. This is sad, but actually true, because hey, we do sim hardware that has to be realistic and physics. So it was actually, yeah, this was a business expense, just because it is. I talked about the car already and how it was excellent, and there were instructors. And if given the chance to use your new license, would you? That's something I'm sort of thinking about. I would probably like to do a bit more in the future, but ideally with a car with less powered steering or better brakes, just to see how a more racing car would feel. But we'll have to see. I mean, this was 3,500 euros and it was a terrible car. If you want to step that up, yeah, sense of danger, I talked about that quite a bit. No confidence in getting two big slides going, and other people from avoiding me. So yeah, danger held me back until it dried out and I got more confident and the tires were changed. And yeah, Leclerc not too happy. He's gonna get his ass handed to him next year. The curbs are very flat at Assen, so even in the wet they were still somewhat grippy actually too. So very little impact unless you hit like the sausage things, and then it's more serious. But yeah. Oh, more questions. Jeez, how long are we going? How direct and responsive the steering? So it wasn't very direct. Street steering rack, quite a slow steering rack. There's not really a lag at all between the steering and what the car does. Seat feel, I think, kind of, yeah, perhaps overrated. I'm not sure. I didn't feel like a revelation that I suddenly had my buttocks experiencing G-forces. But the seat was a bit too big for me as well, so moved around a bit too much in it. So you get a better sense of you get a sense of G-forces, and being smooth is more sort of easy to do because you're feeling it more. In the sim you have to learn it a bit more, but I've learned it in the sim. Didn't really feel that the seat feel was suddenly adding a whole dimension to the whole thing. It's not like the oversteer I was catching with my buttocks. It was really just, okay, I see the horizon move a bit. I heard the revs rise. This is oversteer. I have to apply some opposite. It had nothing to do with seat feel. Base grip, well, it wasn't there. Sliding grip seemed, I don't know, kind of the same in the wet. Load sensitivity is very technical. No idea really. It's very, with the cars being a bit bent. Not really, in the sense that, you know, load transfer really worked. Like at the end, my car was a bit understeery, and if I managed to control the brake pedal enough, which was hard, and keep just a little bit of brakes applied on entry, it would really help turn the car. But that's not really load sensitive. It's just weight transfer, putting more weight on the fronts and giving them a bit more grip. But those things were really sort of exactly the same as I had in my sim, where I made an understeery car. So yeah. How much speed? Well, it's sort of almost at the limiter in fourth gear, which is about 180 kilometers an hour ish, before the almost flat out left-hander. Lap times were not kept track of. Some people had like an app on their phone, but I still have my Nokia, so no app for me. Yeah, yeah. How did you predict that? I had my brake failure there. So yeah, I went into this in great detail. It was fun, especially, you know, towards the end. No, the track was super flat. Not bumpy at all. That's interesting, actually. The car was stiffened, I think, but very noisy. Noise is actually another thing. You sort of think, okay, I'm gonna hear the engine and a bit of road noise and that's it. But it was so difficult to hear your instructor and the sound. It was very hard to explain. But yeah, you heard the engine, but the tire roar and the wind noise was so much louder that it sort of became like you're in a bathroom, a small bathroom, and there's a loud sound playing, and it's all sort of bouncy, very annoying sound actually, and quite off-putting and not fun. Same for the smells. I mean, the fuel and the fumes and the brakes, the sounds I'm relatively sensitive to sounds and smells, and in that regard, sim racing, you just smell your own armpits, but that's a lot better than brakes and rubber and stuff. So just that physical sort of the sensory experience wasn't pleasant. I don't like the smell of racing. There's no footage. I really focused on just myself and doing the laps, and didn't bring a camera or anything like that. What do you think? Obviously only one, Automobilista. It's a bit hard to tell. I think you can make Assetto Corsa and Automobilista and R-Factor 2 do pretty much. It's more a thing of parameters, values in the physics than that Assetto Corsa or R-Factor or Automobilista are not able to compare to the real deal here. They probably can. iRacing, I'm not sure. It's just that logical oversteer. It's just, I cannot drive iRacing. I find it terrible. My sim racing products, well, they have to get a lot worse if we're going to get close to the feel of these pedals. So probably not. So with sim racing, yeah, I think it prepared me a little bit, and surprisingly, actually, the sense of speed was quite similar. When we approached this 100+ mile an hour super fast left-hander, I was sort of thinking, hey, now I'm getting confident in the car, and I'm just experiencing exactly the same sense of speed that I am in the sim with my properly set up triple screen with field of view sort of to match, and that felt really similar, whereas I was expecting perhaps the sense of speed to be greater in real life. It wasn't, so that was pretty cool. Where does the sim racing lack in comparison? The crappiness of the controls, I mentioned that, but and you go on about that. It's just the realness. Like it's fun, but it's also real. That was the biggest thing for me. You can probably, especially in the dry, make a sim handle very closely to this, but it's real. It's not a game, and that was sort of the main thing, especially when you're not too confident in the car. So the window where you're sliding it just a little bit, but well, that window, since at the end my car was a bit understeery, it was never really going sideways. Only on left-handers it sort of was a bit asymmetrical. Left-handers were a lot more towards oversteer than right-handers, which were very understeery. Just, yeah, not a perfect car. But it's not hard to feel when you're at that limit. And with oversteer, well, it was too hard in the wet to really stay in a small limit. It was too easy to go beyond. But so I think that window is mainly in the sim. You can set up the car to be a bit more oversteer or go towards, just a bit towards oversteer. You can really tune that, and it's the same all the time. And here the conditions change so often, and the car was not perfect. So I didn't really have the option to be in that zone, even in the window, even if I wanted to. Brands Hatch, yeah, that's a safe track. I'll feel very confident with my wimpy nature. Thanks for the offer though, assuming you're serious. That in a way would be great, but Brands Hatch, you know, I'm really quite wimpy, and it's a long drive from here, so if it's not Assen, I probably won't. That if you do wet physics, you need more than a reduction in grip. It was quite interesting how the lines were different and where the grip was, and that different tarmac felt different, and just in general how little grip there was in the wet. And in some way the terribleness of the car is something we don't have in AMS, and I don't think many sims have it. I could be wrong. Just that deliberately making the brakes worse or something, or the steering terrible. I haven't managed to make, I tried, but I cannot make the car feel so, the controls feel so bad as they were in real life. It's all perfect in the sim, where the steering rack is frictionless and all the forces go to your wheel, and there's no power steering numbing it in between. The brake force is just okay, proportional to how hard you press the brakes. Sure, there's a bit of fade and stuff in it, but like sort of a damped, weird, mushy, random layer for the brake pedal would probably be required. And that's also like with historic cars in sims, it's so easy to find a limit on braking and things like that. And in real life, if these pedals are even remotely similar to what I've experienced, the weak link in trying to brake at the limit is probably, to some extent, the brake pedal. And in sims, these things tend to be perfect. So I think AMS, Assetto Corsa, and rFactor 2, not iRacing, can easily be made to feel very close to this. So yeah, the throttle responsiveness was, I can imagine it's like that, I can make it like that in the sim, but I wasn't quite prepared for that. So I talked about the limit and how it felt quite a bit already. Yeah, no feel at all through the wheel at the limit, absolutely not. But as well, I think it was a good question. Somebody, I don't consciously, I didn't feel a lot through my ass. Still mainly just looking where I was going, what the refs were doing, and how. Of course, you are there, so you do feel it, but it wasn't very conscious. Can sim racing make you a better driver? Yeah. It would have been nice if we were ahead of this like 30 years ago and cloned me, so there was this non-sim racing version and the sim racing version, and we did it at the same time. It's very hard to tell. I think it must have, just, you know, the lines, the sense of speed was all very good. Some of the handling was similar, and you can make a car very close to it. So yeah. So okay, we've already established I'm a slight wimp. So 100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck. I think 100 duck-sized horses. Yeah, obviously. So the H pattern shifter, that's we've never hinted that will be out this year. Actually, I don't know where you got that from. It probably won't. Actually, it won't. Ooh, sorry. I mentioned it was a bit worn. The synchros I think were worn. I had to shift really slowly, or I could like force it. But even though it was a cheap, sort of a banger almost car, cheap, well, 1,700 euros, I didn't want to force it too much, so I went slow on the shifts, and it felt like a worn road car shifter, not great. The secrets of the forestry bag are that they are too good. It's not like that in real life. There's no secret really. It's just hard work from Renato and me as well, and a subjective element to it as well. Okay, wow, geez, 11:30. Holy crap! And clearly not enough truth syrup consumed, so whether I spoke the truth at all is a matter of debate. Right. Well, if this raised more questions than it answered, feel free to post some. I think I've covered most of it. Let's just give a quick look at my cheat sheet. Managed to condense it nicely in a very short, to-the-point video, as usual. Yeah, I think that's just about covers it. It was super interesting, confidence growing, matching with the simulator quite well if you make the car properties sort of towards how it was in real life. Am I sort of extremely looking forward? Oh, I caught the bug. I have to do it again and again. Kinda, you know, not really. Firstly, it's just very expensive, but even that, my sim is here. I can get in, choose any car, any track I want, and do as many laps as I want, and I can get out and I can have fun and I can be in the zone and concentrate. But it's not real, and I can get out and in, and it's fine. It doesn't cost anything. Just the smell, the sound, the noise, the fact that it's real and that you can potentially get an expensive repair bill or even a bit of damage or a slight bit of pain. It kind of kept me from, like, the bug hasn't really bit me to some extent. So I'm not entirely sure. I think I would still like to do a bit more in like a GT4 car or a Formula 4 car, something that's actually race-worthy with good pedals and steering. But we'll have to see. I'm quite happy with sim racing, and I kind of prefer just the comfort of sim racing, and that you can do it all the time and you don't have to go through all the hassle and stuff like that. So that sounds quite negative about it. It was awesome, but it's also very, very different, despite being very similar. That's the wine talking. But not something I must do, and I'll put everything to the side to do more. I'm still interested in the whole thing, and then perhaps will do a bit more if we can get a better car and a better situation at some point. But no, not super bitten by the bug. Alright, that's about it. If this thing has recorded, and otherwise I'm real sad. Catch you next time, and if you have questions, post them. Thanks.